So let's talk about personality. Even if you've known someone for a long time, they might still be able to surprise you. Maybe with fears that you never knew they had, or a legion of special skills that they've been keeping under wraps. Often it's just about asking the right question. And when it comes to language, that's exactly what we aim to do. Even something as familiar as a verb phrase can have secrets tucked away inside. I'm Moti Lieberman, and this is the Ling Space.
Welcome to the Ling Space.
The framework known as X-bar theory essentially says that humans come with a rough syntactic sketch inside their heads in order to explain how we build our sentences. It provides a template, which at first might seem too simple to do much good, but when it's put to proper use, it actually has the ability to generate each and every expression that makes up part of someone's language, without a misstep. In fact, it's that very simplicity that makes X-bar theory so powerful. Not only can it deftly deal with the different categories that make up the structures in any given language, it'll happily handle whatever word order you throw at it, no matter if it's German, Irish, or Mi'kmaq. Like, X-bar theory can handle transitive verbs just fine, like in his father read the book. But there's a sinister problem lurking at its core. It doesn't have any good way of coping with ditransitive verbs, so words like give and put. These have not one, but two objects following them, one direct and one indirect, as in give the pen to Clark or put him in the swimming pool. For a template that only has one slot after the verb, that's a bit of a shock, so let's take a closer look at where things go awry and how we can solve this conundrum. Direct and indirect objects are both arguments of the verb, which means that they represent participants in the action or the event being described. And these sorts of phrases are pretty much indispensable, since you can't say things like give to Clark or put him by themselves. In order to represent this requirement, X-bar theory situates both objects next to the verb like so. But the branches of the trees holding our sentences together are typically divided into two, well, if they branch at all. So a three-way split definitely breaks with tradition. Of course, we could chalk it up to ditransitives just being an exception. We could even force them into our existing template if we really wanted to. But the problem is more than just aesthetic. It actually runs against some really well-established grammatical facts. Let's say that Melanie has a mirror. Then we could easily imagine saying a sentence like, Melanie showed David himself, with himself effortlessly referring back to David. But according to the principles of binding theory, which spell out when and where pronouns like himself can appear, it should be just as easy for us to use Melanie showed himself David to express that very same thought. If this is the right shape for our tree, either one should work, since even if the ordering's different, the structural relationships in each case are exactly the same. But in the second case, himself just can't refer to David, no matter how hard it tries to. This strongly suggests that somehow the first object is actually higher up in the tree than the second, that it sort of outranks it. So what could this possibly look like? To answer that, we'll have to take a short detour through the syntax of causation. In English, we use verbs like make and cause to represent the fact that somebody made something happen. So we can take a sentence like they fight back and add in a third party, like in Sydney made them fight back. But this isn't the only way languages introduce causers into the mix. There's at least one class of verb that has this causative meaning built right into it, so-called lexical causatives. These verbs like melt and roll connect people to the events that they set in motion. Oliver melted the ice means that he caused the ice to melt, while she rolled the oven down the alley draws a similar kind of connection. These sorts of verbs are different from ordinary transitive verbs like punch or kick, both in their meaning and their syntax. While you can say that Oliver punched the ice but nothing happened to it, you can't say Oliver melted the ice but nothing happened to it. The causative meaning is too much a part of the word to be cast aside. More to the point, these verbs can optionally skip over the causer and go straight to what was caused. So the ice melted, or the oven rolled down the alley. So how can we account for the behavior of these verbs? Do we have to suppose that there are two separate versions of the verb stored in our head, each associated with a slightly different structure? Well, one big clue comes from languages that have a richer morphology than English. When we look at, say, Malagasy, we see a similar pattern, but where the mechanism is much more visible. In shifting from the transitive verb hide something to the intransitive hide yourself, Malagasy swaps out the beginning of the word. In Tagalog, the intransitive verb fall shows up as this, while actively knocking someone down looks like this, again with a different set of sounds at the start. And in Japanese, the intransitive verb hekomu, meaning to be dented, turns into the transitive hekomasu, meaning to dent something. The root verb is the same in either case, but its function inside a sentence changes by way of a special affix that inserts itself between the verb and the tense marker. Let's see how this works in tree form. So if we had a sentence like kikai ga hekomu, for the machine will be dented, our tree would look something like this. Since kikai is the only participant in the sentence, it goes on to become the subject, while the verb moves up the tree to join together with the tense marker like the verbs do in French. In contrast, speakers also have the option of inserting another layer into the structure headed by the morpheme as, which then paves the way for an agent to come in to cause the event in question. In David ga kikai o hekomasu, David's now denting the machine. He then goes on to become the subject of the sentence as a whole, while the verb once again climbs the tree to collect all of its suffixes and become a full-fledged word. In this setup, there's no need to suppose that two versions of each verb exist. Instead, whenever an agent appears, it's simply the result of a special kind of phrase found sitting just on top of the regular verb phrase, a kind of shell wrapped around the main VP, whose job is to invite other personalities into the mix. Importing the idea over into English, we can make an educated guess that verbs like melt and roll follow the same blueprint. These verbs have to get involved with inserting all the relevant players into the action, so now they get split across two different sections of the sentence. And when the part of the tree tasked with introducing the subject doesn't show up, the object is all that's left. We might even suppose that ordinary transitive verbs like keep or erase make use of this kind of structure too. When we look at how much influence subjects and objects have over the meanings of their verbal hosts, we find that objects seem to be a lot more closely connected to them than subjects. Phrases like throw a toaster and throw a fit denote very different kinds of throwing, and the same with take an aspirin and take a nap. But switching one subject for another doesn't really have the same effect. Lenny took a nap and Benny took a nap describe fundamentally the same event, just with different nap takers. Our split VP idea matches up with this nicely. Best of all, we finally have a satisfying explanation of what the structures of ditransitive verbs must be like. If agents and causers really do make their way into sentences separately from objects, this opens up the space that we need to fit the ditransitive puzzle piece into our overall picture of sentence structure. Let's have a look at how this actually works. So we've argued in the past that the structure of an English verb phrase has to look something like this, with the subject starting off at the top and then later moving up even higher to become the subject of the sentence as a whole. But you can see that this doesn't really leave any room for the indirect object, at least not unless we use the three-way branching. But now we toss in our new agent adding structure, which surrounds our original verb phrase. Call it the little VP, to mark the difference between it and the main one. Since the subject now starts off a bit higher in the tree, there's extra space inside the lower verb phrase, enough to hold both objects. Then, just like in Japanese, the verb moves up into the top floor, giving us the word order we want. Ditransitives aren't really exceptions after all, and with the first subject in a position that's higher up in the tree than the second one, the facts about reflexives, or words pointing back to other parts in the sentence, make total sense. A pronoun like himself can't show up first because that would put it up too high in the tree to be able to refer back to David, whereas the other way around is fine. And even though we can't see this extra structure with the naked eye, we can test to see whether it's really there. If verb phrases really are split in two, there end up being twice as many spots for adverbs like again to attach to, which means that we expect to find differences in meaning. And sure enough, a sentence like Dr. Poole closed the door again has two subtly different interpretations. One where he'd closed the door before and then did it again, and another where someone else had closed it first, and after it was opened, he closed it again. As you can see, different languages can reveal different sides to the same universal grammar that we all possess, and when they work together, there's no secret that they can't uncover. So we've reached the end of the Ling space for this week. If you cracked open your verb phrase to see what's inside, you learned that certain words, like give and put, pose a problem for our current theory of syntax. That some languages use a special kind of structure to introduce agents and causers into the mix, and that if English has these structures too, it helps explain ditransitive verbs, how they interact with reflexives, and why subjects and objects seem so different. The Ling space is made by all of these amazing people over here. If you want to learn more about how these ideas tie into the passive voice, check back on our website. Oh, and while you're there, why not check out our store? You can even get the Super Schwa shirt that I'm wearing there. We're also on Tumblr, Twitter, and Facebook, and if you want to keep expanding your own personal Ling space, please subscribe. Oh, and tap that little notification bell down below if you want to find out right when we post a new video. See you next time. Parlo com.